Of its deadly raid on an aid ship bound for Gaza. Now, the video shows passengers on the ship throwing a box of plates and a stun grenade at Israeli soldiers. The Israeli operation killed 9 people. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is digging his heels in, rejecting criticism of the deadly raid.
We have a right to inspect cargo heading into Gaza. And here's our policy. It's very simple. Humanitarian and other goods can go in, and weapons and more war material cannot. And we do let civilian goods get into Gaza. We made several offers, time and again. Offers to deliver the goods on board the Flotilla to Gaza after a security inspection. Egypt made similar offers. And these offers were rejected time and again. The first soldier, they were met with a vicious mob. They were stabbed, they were clubbed, they were fired upon. They were members of an extremist group that has supported international terrorist organization and today support the terror organization called Hamas. This wasn't a love boat. This was a hate boat.
Joins live former U.S. Ambassador to the UN, John Bolton. Ambassador, good evening. This event, this tragedy, this violence, catastrophe, however we want to characterize it, an isolated event that we're going to sort of move carefully through, in a few days it'll be over, or is this sparking a bigger problem?
No, there's a lot more coming here. This is part of an overall effort to end the blockade of the Gaza Strip that I think we have to understand is not just an Israeli blockade, it's an Egyptian blockade too. The Egyptians don't like Hamas any more than the Israelis do. But in the Arab world and the Muslim world, there's a lot of determination to break that blockade. So other ships are already on the way. I'm sure more is coming.
Well, what does this mean, though, bigger picture? I mean, Turkey, these were 9 people from Turkey. Turkey's an ally of Israel. We're quite friendly with Israel. Now that's a very strained relationship. What does it mean sort of for the whole region?
Well, I think what's going on with Turkey really is less the loss of Israel's sole Muslim ally than it is Turkey slipping away from the West. Ever since the end of World War I, with the end of the Ottoman Empire, the idea of Turkey has been as a secular democratic state. I think with the government that we have in place now and have had for the last 6 or 7 years, it's going in the wrong direction. And I think that could be one of the most significant outcomes of this whole crisis.
Is this, though, event, because now we have 9 dead and there's international condemnation of Israel. Is this now an invitation to many of the haters of Israel to just give more violence towards them, to fight them more?
Sure, absolutely, but they don't need that much of an excuse. This happens in the West Bank all the time, these kinds of clashes, different circumstances, but every time it happens, it's an excuse to go and beat up Israel in the UN Security Council, beat them up in the UN Human Rights Council, and I'm sure Israel's opponents will take full advantage of it. But consider the alternative that people are calling for, including some of America's closest allies, which is to end the blockade. Well, if you did that, you would have Hamas getting weapons of a kind Hezbollah already has in Lebanon, and the threat to innocent Israeli civilians would rise dramatically, in my view.
How do you characterize the U.S. response?
Weak. The United States could have said very clearly on Memorial Day, we are not going to accept a statement by the President of the Security Council that's as critical of Israel as the one that turned out. Now, it was watered down, to be sure. If I had been there and had my discretion, I'd have said, I'm not going to negotiate this. It is fundamentally unacceptable. You don't condemn something and then call for an investigation. If you want to have an investigation, that's one thing, but too many people had already made their minds up.
You know, it's clear that this is a provocation, at least to me. I mean, that, you know, that they intended to provoke. They knew there was going to be a problem. They knew they were going to meet resistance, that they're not going to, you know, the Israelis weren't going to say, oh, fine, come on in. And another ship is on the way. It doesn't, you know, it doesn't look like this is a good situation.
Well, I don't think Israel's going to make the same mistake it made on the Marmor. I think they didn't put sufficient people on the ship immediately. It allowed their people to be isolated. I think the people on those 6 ships had different motivations. I think some were innocent, naive,
How could it be? I mean, everybody knows it, but nobody. You know, there's a blockade there. You know there's the situation. It's not like everyone just heard about this yesterday. I mean, this has been going on.
Some people hug trees. Some people get on boats like this. But there was another layer of people there, very cynical, very tough, who did want to provoke the confrontation. They got what they wanted. I don't think they reckoned the cost, but they got what they wanted, and others will follow them.
I just can't, in my wildest dreams, I can't figure out that anyone, I don't care what your thinking is getting on that ship, no matter how much you want peace, no matter how much you want to help people, it was clear there was going to be a problem.
Well, I don't think it was clear to the Israelis. I think that's part of the problem they now face.
Well, there's a risk of it then. There's always a risk.
I think in the implementation of the operation, there was failure, but there was no failure on Israel's part in carrying out its strategic objective.
Ambassador, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Joining us live is Fox News national security correspondent Jennifer Griffin, and of course she lived in Israel for 8 years, covering the region for Fox News and knows it better than anyone else. Nice to see you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Greta.
All right, weapons in Gaza.
Yes.
Are they getting weapons in Gaza, and where are they getting them?
Well, it's interesting. A lot of the weapons, a lot of the rockets they're firing are homemade. They're made in Gaza, and that's one of the reasons that the Israelis don't want concrete being shipped in. That's on the list of banned goods. But if you go back to 2002, you'll remember there was a ship that was laden with weapons, tons of weapons. It was called the Karine A. I was there at the time, and we covered the interception of this ship that was bringing weapons from Iran, and the Israelis said they were en route to Gaza. It was extraordinary, the amount of weaponry that was on that ship, and that was the real turning point in the relationship between the Bush administration and Arafat. That's when they cut him off. That's when they realized that Arafat was importing these weapons from Iran. So today, when Prime Minister Netanyahu said that we can't just open the waters and allow ships to start bringing in whatever they want to Gaza when you have a group like Hamas controlling that area, you have to go back to ships like the Karine A and remember that there have been many attempts to bring weapons into Gaza. Now, there are no weapons that were found on these ships so far as we know. But as you mentioned, this group from Turkey, many of those Turks on board had said they want to go in as martyrs, and many of them didn't make it home. And so when the wounded came back to Turkey tonight, to Istanbul, they were greeted as heroes and with cheers. And so I think the activists got what they wanted in terms of provoking Israel.
Hamas, tell us, I mean, the United States says Hamas and many other nations, Hamas is a terrorist group. Who is Hamas?
Well, Hamas basically, in its when it was formed and founded, its sole mandate is the destruction of Israel, and it stops short of nothing less than that by its own mandate. And it is not in favor of a two-state solution, and they took over in 2007 illegally. They won elections legitimately. These were elections pushed actually on the Israelis by Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice at the time. They won some elections, but then they basically overthrew the Fatah-led government, and that's when Israel imposed this strict blockade. And don't forget, as Ambassador Bolton mentioned, the Egyptians are part of that blockade too. They control the southern entrance into the Gaza Strip, the Rafah border crossing, and they have been just as worried about weapons getting into the Gaza Strip and also Hamas activists getting into the Sinai.
What's Gaza like?
Gaza. Well, the sad thing about Gaza is that the 1.5 million people there are being punished on a large scale because Hamas is in power there. Now, it is one of the most tightly packed, heavily populated, impoverished places in the world that I've ever been. And I have a lot of dear friends left behind there who worked for Fox when we were down there, and they have a very, very difficult time. Their families can't come and go as they please. They're stuck in Gaza, and it feels like a big prison. That's what Palestinians like to say, is it's a big prison.
Food, clothing, shelter, packed like many people to small areas?
Absolutely. I mean, you're talking, I think it's one of the most densely populated parts of the world, and the housing is, you have apartment blocks, but you also have people living in, particularly after some of the recent operations that Israel's carried out, there are a lot of destroyed areas and families living in rubble. But so Gaza is a rough place. It is a place that needs lots of development, lots of aid, and unfortunately, as long as Hamas is in power, Israel certainly is not going to allow the kind of development there that it is going to remain the way it is for some time.